I want to continue talking about Iran though today. Iran is in the news for a lot of reasons. And if you missed my show earlier in this week, I had a guest joining me named Claire Lopez. She was Center for Security Policy. She is a true national expert on the religion of Islam, and especially on Iran. She's a former CIA operative. She is regularly touted as an expert in Congress all over the place. I mean, talks at all and has taught at high-level institutions about the dangers of Iran. She came on the show last week and described all of the evil committed by Soleimani that we know about. If she knows this, the Democrat members of Congress know this, or they should know this. And if they don't know this, they don't understand the problem, and they are just virtue signaling to their base that they are going to be so proud to have tried to rein in the president and his conduct in dealing with Iran because he killed a man as evil as Soleimani. But I want to turn to this idea about leftists versus patriots on Iran. This really shouldn't be a Democrat versus Republican. It shouldn't be conservative versus liberal, but it is that. I'm sorry to report, and it's sad and it's dangerous, but it is that. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Iran. As you've heard in my show many times before, the people of Iran, the Persian people, long, ancient, noble history, are in the streets regularly and have been literally, it's been over 2 years, ongoing rolling protests in major cities around Iran. They want to get rid of their government. They deplore the Islamic regime. They deplore the mullahs. They do not want to be ruled by Sharia. They do not want to live under the Iranian constitution, but they have no power. But they are in the streets. They are protesting. And in the past, we had other times there were protests really growing, and President Obama had a chance to back the protesters, at least to take the public position on the public stage at the UN, at the White House, somewhere to say, we stand with the protesters. We do not think the people of Iran should have to live under the oppressive regime of the Islamic mullahs, the jihadist mullahs. We support the freedom movement of the Iranian people. But President Obama could not do that. Not only could he not do that, he went out of his way to embolden, to fund, to aid, and to help the Iranian mullahs. And the left in this country went right along with him, which leads me to two clips I want to have the very wonderful Matt play for us in this segment. One was Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, was interviewed where she was talking with, I think Papadopoulos, I forget who she was talking, Papadopoulos, about how she would react to the Iranian protesters. What does she think about this fact that the Iranian protesters are in the street? Listen to her moral confusion and ignorance, and then we'll talk about how President Trump handled this. But here's Nancy Pelosi talking to Stephanopoulos about the Iranian protesters.
The question is how we get there. We're seeing now demonstrations in the streets of Iran against the regime. Do you support those protesters, and would it be a good thing if they brought the regime down?
Well, the protesters are protesting, as I understand it, this brand of protesters, about the fact that that plane went down, and many students were on that plane, and these are largely students in the street. I think the Iranians should have not had commercial flights going off when there was.
They're calling out the regime for lying. They're saying death to Khamenei as well.
No, well, whatever it is. But the fact is this: there were protesters in the streets before against the regime. After the taking out of Soleimani, there were protesters in the street joined together, as you know, against us. That wasn't good. Taking down this plane is a terrible, terrible tragedy. And they should be held accountable for letting commercial flights go at a time that was so dangerous. But there are different reasons why people are in the street. Of course, we would love to see the aspirations of the people of Iran realized with a better situation there. But escalating the situation, unless we've exhausted every other remedy.
Which we haven't?
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that. And if the first action to be taken on the threat of... there are a lot of bad actors who are doing bad things and threatening bad things to us. We know that, Iran being one of them, and it being its proxies doing bad things to our interest throughout the world. But how do we deal with that in a way that calms rather than escalates?
I want to ask you a question.
Okay, I'm telling you, folks, she is very troublesome. It's a very troubling clip you just heard. This is the alleged leader of the House it is the leader of the House Democrats. Is one of the key leaders of the Democrat Party in this entire country. She, first of all, was unclear about, so let me correct something she said. She tried to claim the protesters were in the street lamenting the death of Soleimani. As we talked about in the show, and if you look back on our website, you can find the links to stories about this. Iranian journalists were reporting that the protests in the street were not supporting Soleimani. The Iranian government was trying to force people, arm twisting people, closing schools, closing businesses, demanding the people pour out into the streets and protest the death of Soleimani. It was an orchestrated effort by the Iranian regime to pretend to the world that the Iranian people were upset about Soleimani's death, which they were not. Most of the people were in the street, and they were not chanting, "Oh, we love Soleimani, it's sure sad about him." They're chanting against the mullahs. They don't want to live under the kind of regime that would send Soleimani around the world killing people. They actually don't like it. And so Nancy Pelosi, cannot be honest about the situation in Iran. She cannot acknowledge that these protests and the people in the streets who were protesting about Soleimani were arm twisted by the government, threatened with, not arm twisted, not even bribed, threatened with death, threatened with jail. They go, okay, we'll go out in the streets, fine, we'll go protest. She cannot be honest about the situation. She cannot say, yes, the Iranian people are repressed. They hate the mullahs. They hate the Iranian regime. They want freedom. They want to get out from under the control of this Islamic jihadist regime. She can't tell the truth. She was asked about what other remedies would be. It's not like no one ever did anything to Iran to try to bring about some sort of order, some sort of protection, some sort of help for the people. We've had sanctions on Iran. The world agreed to those. But then Barack Hussein Obama came along as president of the United States, and he negotiated the Iranian deal. The Iranian deal presumed the legitimacy of the Islamic regime, treated the Islamic regime as though it was worthy of being treated as an actual adult, responsible country, an actual leadership of a sovereign nation, treated the Islamic regime of Iran as though they ought to be, trusted to come to the negotiating table to work out a deal, came up with the Iranian deal, which, as we talked about in the show, I don't even know how many times, the Iranian deal enabled the Iranian government to develop nuclear weapons. Farce for the Iranian regime. It was a farce for the Obama administration to try to claim that the Iranian deal somehow made the world safer because it tried to limit the Iranian development of nuclear weapons. The Iranian deal enabled the development of nuclear weapons because within the Iranian deal, many reasons, but one big one within the Iranian deal there were inspections established saying that, if you want to say you're not developing weapons, then you have to let inspectors come into your country. And they're going to come and check out what you're developing, what you're working on. But the deal itself carved out all of the logical places Iran would be developing nuclear weapons, carved those out as off limits to the inspectors. Kind of like the analogy I made many times in this show, kind of like saying that the police coming to search your home, but for the murder weapon, but you've carved out in the search warrant, but you can't look in my gun closet and you can't look in my attic. And the police go, okay, sure. Well, we'll look in the places they let us look. Hey, we didn't find the gun. It was an absurd deal. Unconstitutional also because President Obama never brought that deal, the Iranian deal, through the Senate as is required by our Constitution, because he knew full well even Democrats, some of them weren't going to support it. The Republicans for sure were not going to support it because they can all see Iran is a dangerous nation. We do not make deals with them. On top of that, we shipped millions, in fact, billions of dollars in various forms to the Iranian regime, which then enabled them to continue funding their reign of terror throughout the Middle East. So All of what I just said was captured very well by another member of Congress, Representative Dan Crenshaw from the great state of Texas, made us in an interview. I want to have Matt, the very wonderful play, Dan Crenshaw, explaining why the Democrats continue to defend the Iranian deal. And as you'll see in this clip we go to in just a moment here, there was at the beginning of the clip, they have Susan Rice, and she is claiming, she's actually looking at the camera and claiming to the American people that everything was hunky-dory with Iran. Everything was great with Iran under the Iranian deal until Trump came along and ruined it all. I mean, she tells lie after lie after lie in just a very short segment. So you have first Susan Rice, and then you'll have the great Representative Dan Crenshaw setting the record straight. Please play that clip, Matt.
In the years since the signing of the deal in 2015, up until President Trump's unilateral withdrawal, abandoning our allies against the advice of his advisors, there were no proxy attacks by Iranian proxies on U.S. personnel in Iraq. There were no efforts by Iran to attack our drones in the Persian Gulf or attack shipping. The nuclear program was under control. There were strict verification and inspections.
Well, they're obsessed with defending their strategy of appeasement, right? They thought that the best way to deal with Iran was to pay them off, send over pallets full of cash, unfreeze their assets, lift sanctions, and then hope for change, right? Remember President Obama's theme was hope and change, and that was their foreign policy as well. It didn't work, and it's time to accept that, because what actually happened was the Iranians were enriched and therefore able to fund their Quds force more and destabilize the region, destabilize Syria, Yemen, fund sleeper cells in Bahrain, fund Shia militias in Iraq. You played a clip of Susan Rice saying that there was no attack from proxies on American forces. Is she forgetting about the over 600 deaths of American soldiers that were a result of Iranian-made IEDs? I mean, to say that this all started after Trump, and this is another misconception that the Democrats like to peddle, which is that history began with Donald Trump. History began with the killing of Soleimani. It did not begin with the killing of Soleimani. It began long before that, since 1979, actually. Since right as the Iran deal was being signed, they were humiliating our U.S. Navy sailors and boarding U.S. Navy vessels in the Gulf. Okay, and since then they've bombed oil tankers, bombed Saudi oil facilities, bombed our bases, and then attacked our embassy, and of course killed an American citizen. To say that they weren't the ones escalating out of desperation is to deny facts.
Deny reality. Okay, that was Representative Dan Crenshaw, who also was severely injured fighting for America, lost an eye. That's why he wears an eye patch. But the point of this segment is this. I said at the start of the show, I wanted to call this segment, it was called like Leftists versus Patriots on Iran. It's really important to understand this, because leftists cannot perceive the difference between good and evil, because the leftists have elevated secularism and intellectualism and their godlessness as the highest source of their assessment, their understanding of the world, their read of the world, their appreciation or insights into events. They simply cannot understand that evil exists. The only evil that exists in the minds of most of the leftists in Washington is, in their worldview, is Trump. Is how can we get rid of Trump? What are we going to do to get rid of Trump? Can we get rid of him somehow? This is what the leftists think of as evil. So you have a regime like Iran, who's been at war with America for 40 years, since 1979, since the founding of their country, after they overthrew the Shah and they put in place this Islamic jihadist regime. That regime has been in place for 40 years, and in its very constitution calls for the destruction of Western civilization, calls for the spread of Islamic jihad, to spread Islam around the world and force it on the world. So they are by definition at war with us. And the answer of the leftists is because they can't see a reason to discern truth. They can't see a reason. They can't recognize good versus evil. They can't call it evil. They just see everything as, well, as negotiable. And then we go over there, we give them a bunch of money. In fact, we give them billions of dollars, and they promise they're not going to develop nuclear weapons. And then we protect and enable them. And then you had President Trump come along, and this is the Patriot side of this equation. President Trump come along and say, you know what? We're not going to help them repress the world. We're not going to help them repress their people, and we're not going to help them spread Islamic jihad around the world. We're going to try to stop them. You had President Trump on another level with ISIS, different from Iran, but for ISIS for a moment, one of the things he said in his campaign, we're going to stop them. These are evil forces in the world. This ISIS caliphate in Iraq and Syria is going to be obliterated, and he did it. So back to Iran, you have President Trump come along saying, number one, we're going to help the people. We're going to help the people who are in the streets, the people in the streets trying to stand up for their own freedom. We're going to help them. And so one thing he did, and he has sent signals of support to the protesters. He's also, as a response of this, after our American forces killed Soleimani and the Iranians fired more rockets at American military forces and brought down their own, by mistake, where they brought down that Ukrainian jetliner because they have no control over the military. So you have the Iranians again firing at American troops. Iranians, by the way, understanding that we use the term proxy, the Iranian jihadists who run that country fund Hezbollah, Hamas. They fund Islamic terror. It's when they say that these groups are proxies, Iran gets the money they get from us and other places and uses it to pay terrorists to kill people. This is the kind of regime we have. So President Trump came along, number one, and said, after the Iranians fired even more rockets at American sources, American personnel, he further tightened the screws on sanctions. And these sanctions, sometimes people hear that and say, oh, is that all we're doing, sanctions? But in Iran, the more you can isolate this country, the more you can help them understand you don't get to play on the world's playing field when you behave like a murderous bully around the world. So he's tightened sanctions. And this is among the reasons that you have Iranian protesters in the street. They're not protesting America imposing sanctions. They're protesting having to have a government so evil that the world wants to put sanctions on them. There were sanctions, to be fair, on Iran before President Trump came along. The UN had sanctions. Many countries tried to bring sanctions around. And the Iranian deal, in part, was this idea that, well, maybe we make a deal with them. We don't have to sanction them so badly because we're going to make this deal with them, which is a completely bogus surrender. It wasn't an Iranian deal. It was a surrender to Iran. But Trump's more recent conduct, I simply must share with you. So President Trump tweeted in the language of Farsi, Farsi being the Persian native language, the language of Iran. So I sent a clip of a picture of the tweet in Farsi to Matt the Wonderful. There it is. Now, I don't read Farsi, but I will tell you that he put that tweet out. And as you can see, 361,000 people liked it, 132,000 people talking about it. It was the most liked Persian tweet in the entire history of Twitter. So Trump is, as he does in America, using Twitter to go around the media, to go around the leftists, to go around the America haters, and to go right to the people and say, we understand, Iranian protesters, we're with you. He, after that, tweeted in English, to the brave and suffering Iranian people, I have stood with you since the beginning of my presidency, and my government will continue to stand with you. We are following the protests closely. Your courage is inspiring. He also tweeted to them in English later, the government of Iran must allow human rights groups to monitor and report facts from the ground on the ongoing protests by the Iranian people. There cannot be another massacre of peaceful protesters, nor an internet shutdown. The world is watching. So this is President Trump leading like a patriot, leading like someone who understands there is such a thing in this world as good and evil. A president willing to say, because Soleimani and the Iranian regime are evil, we're going to treat them like they are evil. We are going to fight against them. We're going to use America's power. Now, America, I'm the first to say, I agree with those people who say that America cannot be the world's policeman. We cannot send troops to every country and make sure every government is just like ours. That is not the case. We cannot be the world's policeman. We can't even really do a very good job of nation building unless the people are with us. And we discover we have challenges in Iraq. It's unclear how that's going to come out, but we tried the nation building thing there, unclear if it's going to work out. But the point is, there are a lot of steps along the way between The Obama left-wing mindset that just closes its eyes to evil, closes its ears to evil, can't articulate the idea that an Iranian regime with a constitution committed to jihad simply may not stand, simply must be opposed, simply must be treated as an enemy, that you cannot buy peace, as Crenshaw was trying to say, Dan Crenshaw, you can't buy peace with the Iranian people by sending them money, by signing an Iranian deal that blocked the Iranian, the inspectors of the UN and the American inspectors from going to the most logical places where the Iranians will be developing nuclear weapons. You can't treat these people as though they're trustworthy and honest, and you can't treat them as though there's a moral equivalency and they have just as much right to function as a jihadist regime as the rest or most of the rest of the free world has to be free countries. The idea of Iran is the idea of a country committed in its founding to jihad is inherently an enemy of America. So they have to be treated that way. I am not advocating military action in Iran. It's not the right answer, I don't think, ever to send troops in. But the leadership that President Trump has shown signals his understanding that a country like Iran will never do the right thing just because you sit down and sign a deal and give them billions of dollars. They're not going to become stable. They're not going to become sane. They're not going to become acceptable. They are in the regime. The regime itself is an evil regime committed to an evil idea of jihad. So President Trump dealt with them and is dealing with them now as more of a patriot, more the way Reagan stood up to the then communist expansionism and said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. You have to stand up against evil. And tying back my first point today, the problem leftists have, many leftists have, and people in power who are leftists have, is they've lost the ability to either understand that good and evil exist, or if they do understand it, they don't think it's not consistent with their intellectualism, elite ruling class secularism to ever say that some ideas are evil and bad and we're going to fight them. They can't do it. They can't identify the evil of Iran, so they can't fight it. So they went along with this just completely worse than just hapless and useless, but actually dangerous Iranian deal, because the Iranians got sanctions lifted, so they made life better for their people as they were continuing to develop nuclear weapons. And you finally had a President Trump saying, you know what, actually not happening. We're going to change the way we treat evil people. We're going to treat them as though they are evil.